Get rolling. All right, you guys know the drill. Roll call. We're here. Acceptance of the agenda. Thank you. Minutes look good. Anybody read minutes and have any comments? Good. Public comment period. No. Right. You're up, Isabel. New business conversation. Review of draft future land use chapter and accompanying map.
Okay. So this is the first time that you're seeing this within the packet. And so I'm going to give a little bit of context to sort of what I've done here and how I've attempted to address some of the goals and the vision statement that we reviewed and came up with over the last few meetings, and how that intersects with the future land use chapter and the accompanying map. After that, I'm going to turn to you and I'm just going to sort of sit back and listen to the conversation. If there are edits that need to be made or questions around, you know, why I did something the way I did, happy to answer those. But for the most part, I'm really looking for some feedback. And I have a couple of specific areas where I will be asking for feedback specifically. So I might end up pausing and just, you know, asking for that in the moment. That's okay. So the first thing that I will do is share the map and just sort of go through this and give some context. We'll then go through each of the areas in a little bit more detail. So this is a draft of the future land use map. What I have done here is try to establish growth areas, which is essentially anything that is not light green or dark green, and then rural and critical natural areas. I want to note at the outset that the growth areas that you're seeing sort of east of 95 essentially match our current growth area boundaries from the 2014 plan. What is different here is this large orange piece, which was not designated as a growth area last time, and then this piece up here, which I am calling Stillwater Avenue West and then Orono West, respectively, in the chapter narrative. So everything else essentially matches our current growth area in terms of boundaries, at least. The vision for some of these has changed through what we've heard thus far. And I do also want to note that I'm presenting this now. We have not had our future land use specific workshops. So this is likely to be refined a little bit more as we hear from the public. But what I took a stab at doing was addressing everything that we've heard thus far. And we will be presenting this to the public for feedback at those future land use workshops.
You anticipate those?
I'm anticipating those to be probably July, but also it depends how long we take to sort of get this to a point where you all are ready to present it to the public. So if that's more like August, that's okay too. Then to drill down a little bit more. So the biggest difference, I think, between the previous future land use map from the 2014 plan and this one is the designation of critical natural areas. And that's things like inland wildlife and wading bird habitat, significant vernal pools, some of the significant wetlands, obviously the bog area, and then also it represents shoreland zoning boundaries. So that's what you're seeing sort of more in town as the critical natural areas. Then what I've also done here is attempted to designate some catalyst sites, and these would be sites that are specifically ripe for further conversation, like master planning or contract zoning efforts, and I can define that a little bit more as needed. But they have some specific environmental or topography or other sort of constraints that really make them difficult to develop, and so probably need some additional conversation. And that's Ayers Island, the former Public Works facility site at 98 Penobscot Street, and then also the subdivision sort of between Main Street and Marshall Street. That was the former gravel pit. Planning board recently saw a preliminary subdivision application that he had, just so that everyone is aware, he's not intending to come back for final on that, at least as currently designed. So there's some environmental constraints and some other issues that make that site pretty difficult. So that's the biggest difference, and I'll flip over to the actual chapter to start talking through the character areas themselves.
1, 2, and 3, and is that?
Yeah, those are those catalyst sites that are probably ripe for further conversation. Okay, so what you should be aware of is that we have growth areas, limited growth areas, and rural areas. Though growth and rural are the only things that are specifically required by the state to be included within the future land use plan. What I have done is sort of went above and beyond that and started to designate what I'm calling character areas. So drilling down a little bit more into the vision as we've heard it from the public so far, and from town staff so far, because I've also presented this to town staff. So there's areas to strengthen that would include like downtown, which already has a variety of existing assets and could be further strengthened by reinforcing its character with tactical investment. Then there are places that we are planning to totally transform. So that's things like Route 2 corridor, and by that I really mean the Park Street side of the Route 2 corridor, declining strip retail centers like the University Mall area, which the plan focuses on redevelopment into walkable, mixed-use, amenity-rich activity centers. There are places to enhance, and that's more like Orono's traditional neighborhoods. So what we sort of refer to as our MDR area just outside of the downtown. And then there are places to preserve, and that's those general rural areas. So again, that's the map. Growth areas are something that's, again, specifically designated by the state. It's also areas where the state anticipates that the town will direct 75% of its capital investment spending over the next 10 to 12 years, or the lifetime of the plan. So that's the other thing that's important to consider, is that growth areas are really the areas where we're wanting to see new infrastructure or major transformative infrastructure projects. Whereas the limited growth areas are things that will remain essentially the same, might need a little bit of maintenance, but won't have transformative infrastructure. And then rural planning is still important, but the town's not going to necessarily be actively directing new infrastructure projects or new spending into that area. But we still need to kind of consider that, because private development can certainly still occur there. So just going into places to strengthen, this is really downtown. We really are talking about adaptive reuse and redevelopment of existing buildings, adding employment uses and residential units in this area, increasing the likelihood of walking and biking for short trips. Really focused on being strengthened as a lively community gathering space with a concentrated effort to improve the visual beauty and appeal of the downtown area. So public art and murals in key areas, filling vacant buildings and addressing vacant buildings. Some of the stuff that has really been talked about since the 1995 downtown plan, where they talked about facade grants and facade improvements of downtown buildings. This area also needs to include some new housing and the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. So that's, for example, like the recent fire mill building, that would be considered an adaptive reuse project, where they took something that was really industrial and turned it into new housing for the area. Generally adding housing on the upper floors of downtown buildings, adding units to large single family houses on Main Street, and new construction on underutilized parcels. So really trying to get more feet on the street in this area, allowing offices by right, so that we have people in town really all day long. So working in town, they might leave and go live somewhere else, but then we are replacing them with the folks who live in the downtown. Yep.
You refer there to what sounded to me like subdivided large homes on Main Street. What exactly is meant by that?
Yeah, so that is what's meant by that, yeah, on some level. So allowing for, as you probably know, with the passage of L 2003, every lot in the growth area that's served by public water and sewer is now allowed, so long as they can meet density requirements, I should say, to have up to 4 units on it. So it could look like, for example, and I should note that these are general vision recommendations, but we would have to do ordinance amendments to actually reflect these vision changes. So it could look like, for example, dropping density on some level to encourage a duplex or a triplex, or even 4 units in existing buildings.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about conversion of existing large single family
Yeah.
buildings into or even apartment buildings.
Could be, yeah.
How does that mesh with the historic district, with efforts from 12 years ago? or whatever?
Well, that's what caught my eye, Main Street.
Yeah, so as we talked about, and I think we sort of had this conversation at the outset when we talked about the optional historic overlay standards that we adopted for these properties along Main Street, and I'm specifically talking about the historic district properties. They were meant to encourage, as I understand it, and feel free to jump in if I'm incorrect, but they were meant to encourage better maintenance and sort of a historical, maybe not accuracy per se, but at least rehabilitation in keeping with the historic character of the buildings. They did that by allowing as an option offices to be located in these buildings. As I understand it, there may be one that has utilized that, but none of the others have actually utilized the option. And in fact, it's been fairly confusing for folks living in this area, as came up during one of our conversations when it might have been Laura said, well, I have a friend that lives here and she said that she had to do it this way. And it's not a requirement to be historically accurate or follow the Secretary of Interior standards unless you're doing an office building here. So it may not have had the full desired effect, is what we were hearing. And at our downtown meeting back in November, we had all of these conversations about feet on the street and getting people into our downtown and encouraging redevelopment of businesses. One of the main things we talked about was within this sort of 3/4-ish mile area, allowing for higher density and additional units where possible that fit in with the surrounding neighborhood so that people could walk into downtown. And it is a very quick, easy walk, about 3/4 mile.
I guess I'm having trouble distinguishing what we're talking about, well, something that the community suffered from for a long time, and that's the loss of single family housing, dividing buildings up into multiple apartments.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
are not serving the residential needs of families.
I might push back on that a little bit because what we're finding with the data is that folks are open to living in more like townhome style developments or smaller units than they were previously, and if they can live in one. And further down in this draft, I really get to the point of encouraging the new development of single family homes, sort of out on Kelly Road and in other areas as well. So, and just to be clear, we would still need to have conversations about like what the right density is. So is it, allowing about 2 units? Is it allowing about 3 units? As long as it keeps the historic character, we still maintain some of these standards, but it's really about allowing for the sustainability of businesses downtown and the hope that it draws new businesses into downtown as we bring folks in.
Yeah, it's just a visual corridor. I mean, we spent such amount of time last time identifying that. That's why we developed the historic overlay.
Yeah.
If it's some combination, yeah, I understand your I guess concern or confusion about that. You don't want it just to all of a sudden turn all the nice houses on Main Street turning into multi-unit. Yeah. Yeah, some combination of those or.
The problem we try to solve is, I'm trying to just, primarily I ask is, when I build multi-units, they usually are not the best kept buildings. It's an investment, for return, it's different, way to look at things. If I drive down that street, I can pick up multi-units,
Oh, yeah.
just like that. And if it all looks like that, not an awesome way to start in this town. And so I get the need to try to increase housing, but we're talking about maybe 10, 20 units if 20 of those houses convert. So not sure if we're solving a problem. I'd rather be aggressive in other areas to really push housing, by really reducing or increasing whatever, allowing increased density versus altering, that drive in. Especially because that drive in, it used to be a problem in housing. That was driving a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Because it was like people were buying them, they weren't keeping them up, they were unaffordable. That's not a problem. Those things get snapped right up. So, I don't know, this specific thing, I'm not sure I love.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm curious too, because I'm just wondering, what are the limits of National Historic Registry? I mean, does that cut that number of houses down? Because you're not gonna be able to carve them up, are you? If they're on the historic register?
no, I actually want to be clear about, I'll answer your question in a second as well, but I actually want to be clear about the National Register. So unless you're taking advantage of historic tax credits, which by the way, the state did just, the Housing and Economic Development Committee has passed a recommendation to increase the availability of state historic tax credits, so could encourage some redevelopment there. Anyway, unless you're using tax credits, there is no limitation on the National Register from changing the building or tearing down the building. The National Register is not a regulatory list, it's only a recognizing list, if that makes sense. To your point, the attempt that I was trying to do here is, in general, make areas within about a 3/4 mile walk of downtown that, frankly, these are large houses, and it would make sense if I'm looking to carve a building into a duplex or a triplex. I'm looking at the largest houses first. So what I was attempting to do here was address the comments around increasing the feet on the street in and around downtown, letting people walk into downtown, making sure that there's people that live close enough to downtown to be able to walk in and patronize our businesses, because those are the folks that are actively patronizing downtown businesses. I'm totally open to conversation on these properties in particular. I just want to note that the National Register doesn't provide any restriction unless you're using tax credits, which is only for commercial. So you can only use tax credits if you're like renting out a duplex or triplex. And our current overlay standards for the Main Street District are only optional, so are not a requirement unless you're doing an office in the building.
Just out of curiosity, if we limited it, I'm just wondering, we limited it to 2 units, because you remember Claire with the downtown meeting up at the high school, she was talking about, larger house and having somebody live with her, so maybe we could limit that and it might not be as extreme.
Well, it's the size of
If
the
you
lot,
had owner,
it's the size of the lot that controls how many rooms you want. So right now, in the R, it's 40,000 square feet to have a 2-unit?
The minimum lot area requirement in the MDR is 15,000 square feet. And
So
that's per
30,000,
unit,
so
right?
30,000 to have 2 units.
Right.
Which I guess none of them meet that today,
I don't think
They're small.
because that's 3/4 of an acre.
the driving thing behind this whole historic district and having offices and all that was good. There was a lot of concern expressed about preserving the appearance of the
yes,
gateway to stately homes, the big trees, and all that. Everybody liked that, they preserve. But the people that own the houses couldn't find them, they can't afford to preserve that. So we added the provisions of allowing specific kinds of office uses in those buildings, as long as the owner lived there. And then agreed to maintain the property in an appearance that was consistent with its historic nature.
Yeah.
A lot of details.
Yes.
That was the impetus was to preserve the appearance of Main Street driving from the south. That was the whole.
And I think
Making it affordable.
I understand the desire. I personally would argue that it is not having the desired effect if people aren't taking
It's not,
which they aren't. Yeah.
so,
So, it could even be as simple as you can have additional density, 2 units, 3 units. with these standards that we've already looked at extensively and adopted. And it's still an optional standard for our Main Street Historic District. As long as you've met those standards, then it would also be a commercial property where you could utilize historic tax credits to actually maintain the property. I think that's probably what you were trying to get at with the opposites. My argument is just that if only, I think only one, and I might not be sure on the one, hesitated. So,
Yeah, I think we'd want to, preserve the look of that downtown. That is important, but yet provide a little more flexibility if nobody took advantage of it. I don't know how to do that.
I have the whole thing, the get-go, urban appearance or something is a really difficult thing to do.
No,
We talk about preserving vista views, and everybody's thinking of golf course, right?
Yeah.
Well, if that seems to be a golf course, they stop mowing it, 10 years, it's not gonna be a vista view.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do.
Right.
So, I'm talking about preserving vistas, preserving appearances, maybe that's all it's like.
Well, I kind of agree with, if it ain't broke, fix it. Do you feel like most is broke right now? If we feel like it's broke, we should make changes to try to fix it. Feel like it's operating fairly well, the house is having the appearance it's looking for.
But again, if the stately home burns down, you can come up and put on the most butt ugly house that you want to put on that lot. And the appearance of the entire Main Street part will. And you have no way to control this.
Which is fine, right now, I think you want it, I believe.
It's nice to have the appearance with historic nature and big terms, stately homes.
I trust
It's
you.
gotta be affordable. It's gotta be affordable. Somebody has to pay.
just maybe we loosen it up a little bit, but not. Open it up to 3-unit or, at the extremes, if we can incremental changes from what we did the last time, perhaps.
so I wanna know, all I had said here was adding units to the large single-family houses on Main Street.
Yep.
Any further conversation about fully changing the density or what that needs to look like or what have you, would be held when we do our zoning ordinance rewrite in the 18 months after the plan is adopted. Yeah, so right now, all it says is this, adding units along Main Street. In general.
I'd be interested to know if the owners of those homes would like that. Because I suspect they do not.
I will say, I think you're probably correct. On some level, my role, and take it or leave it.
Do I understand that that's not your role? I understand, yeah,
And I totally respect that your role is different from my role.
right.
So my role is only to provide the most public benefit and address the goals that have been, as they have been communicated to me, which was around getting more people in and around town. I totally respect that your role feels different.
Understood, yeah.
So, if this is just a non-starter period, let's have that conversation, but if this is potentially worthy of further discussion,
Yeah, I mean, in the public meeting, whether we can seek more input on that. Not table it, but yes. Yeah.
I wonder what the benefit would, if there's no benefit at all and nothing changes, then it doesn't particularly matter. However, when I look at downtown, I do like the big houses, they look nice, but I'd rather see people. And this is, my college had 750 total human undergrads. That's it. And our downtown had as many or more people walking around in it. Then here, where what was it, 11,000 students? 11,000 students. It's an exponential increase in students, but not in the downtown. I would like to see wandering around downtown. I'd like to see 30 strollers as I drive out of town, and I see a little bit, but not a lot. So it depends on what the benefit might be, right? If we can maintain some of that and actually get more people around doing things in the downtown area, I'd be totally for it. Personally.
Well, and I would add that I think that we are already pretty mixed. I mean, if you, yes, the I don't know, it's east or west side, the left side going down, yeah, there's some beautiful stately houses. But if you look to the right, like across from the Allen Ray Hill house or, any of those houses, they're apartment buildings where students are on the porch and they look pretty awful.
Well, I think that was my point, which is,
So
we
it's
want the
like,
whole Main Street to be like that, yes.
yeah, I mean, maybe there's one in the middle, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, but I'd love to hear, I mean, I don't think that we can decide that, I think that's a bigger question, like you said. Now,
That infill development, we just look for those opportunities like the Blackbear Heights and whatever that was squash. You know, you solve so many issues with that, we just put up a bunch of houses.
Also, allowing things doesn't mean that they're gonna happen, much like with the office use either not happening or only happening once. Most of those houses probably are going to subdivide or turn into, you know, a big apartment complex or anything like that.
Well, if we turn it into 4 or 5 units, then what?
Sure,
If
but
you
what if
turn
it's
it
only
to
two?
Probably not.
Right, that's like a mother-in-law apartment.
Or don't put it up.
I'm totally in support of what you're talking about, and
Yeah,
closer downtown.
everybody can do.
I'm open to what, doing so.
And I can tell you, so I think I understand what you're saying and you're generally wanting to leave this in for, at least for now, so we hear from the public. I can tell you that I have had experience with exactly this situation when I worked in Saco. And we did have some pretty great developments, honestly, of quite dilapidated. Historic homes in our historic district. We had standards, design standards that you had to meet in that instance. They came before my historic preservation committee and we explained to them what standards they had to meet in terms of design. But you know, there was one that was 2, there was a couple that were 3, and then there was one that was 8. And it all looked the same in terms of the outside. You couldn't tell the 8 because the parking lot was in the back, so it looked like just a driveway until you really walked in. So I'm not saying I want to push to 8, but just giving an example.
If the Bangor is the problem there right now, right down State Street, right across from the hospital. Those are great old homes, but there's one of them. Oh, well, actually, there's 2 of them. I can think of them, maybe more, there's 2 of them, I guess. Yeah, I mean, if they're grand old buildings, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't. I think it would make a difference if you opened it up a little bit, but you quiet owner occupied. That's, yeah. I mean, right-
Owner occupations.
Well, right now, with a person, you know, they don't know, are they allowed to rent a room to say a grad student,
Yeah, we don't regulate like, well, you require them,
Register it.
yeah, but we don't like, it's not considered density, so yeah, you can rent a room.
you know? Cause I know building on College Avenue, it just got a waiver to the zoning up there. Prior to that, was violating the rental agreement about renting to 580 people and all that sort of thing, but that had a lot of foreign students, things like that, and they lived in there, like one big happy family. They never caused a problem. The reason they were able to stay under the radar for what they were doing is nothing problem. You know, and I just think that there is a market for the grad students and particularly foreign students. They usually don't have, they don't really have big cities.
Food family housing too.
Yeah. And from my experience, the most of them are excellent tenants. They're great tenants, mind their own business, do their studying, and don't have vehicles, and that's why I'm just wondering if somebody was allowed to rent to a city in one of the big homes. Because we're gonna be coming back to what we talked about earlier, about 1 or 2 people in houses in Orono. That probably exists down in some of the towns, because that probably is the demographic for to live in that. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna guess, but if I had to guess, that would probably be what I would say as well, yeah. Okay, so we'll leave it in, but it is a topic for the public to have some input on for sure. Okay, this one I am specifically seeking input on and I.
You didn't want to do it on that.
No, sorry. But I do need some specific input on the university, so. I will say as the planner and as someone dealing with some of the capacity issues with staff, namely the code enforcement officer right now. I was trying to solve some of the problems with how many projects we are reviewing, which is significant. I mean, it feels like it's ramping up anyway, is what I'm trying to say, and they have explained to me that it is ramping up because they have significant capital improvement money to spend. That's and so our current regulations around the university is anything that occurs within 500 feet of the boundaries of the zoning district, which is essentially campus, comes to the planning board. Also currently, certain kinds of uses that might potentially be more impactful come to the planning board. So that would be like if they created a major, I don't know, additional athletic facility somewhere, or major new dorm building or something like that, that would be required to come to the planning.
Which is all on the table, so you
Yeah.
should take that into consideration, you know?
So I was thinking about, I used to work in South Portland, we had SMCC there. And I lived in Gorham, and I was thinking, we never saw stuff from either of those colleges. And I looked into it, and it's because other university towns in Maine are regulating their university campus through a campus master planning effort. So the university works themselves potentially with town input or somebody sitting on a committee or with a working group to come up with allowed land uses, what they're going to be doing, visual or renderings of what they're planning to be doing, how traffic will be considered, how parking will be considered, how stormwater will be considered, and the university has their own stormwater management system. All of those things. The master plan itself on a 10, 12, 20-year basis is then approved by the town. And then the town planning board or planning staff does not necessarily review every individual project that's coming forward. So the planning board and the town council reviews a master plan, but doesn't necessarily have direct input on every part of the lot, for example, or every additional change that's within 500 feet as we currently do. So I'm seeking input here because what this allows is significant public engagement with the most impacted neighborhoods upfront, town input upfront, and then a 10-year-long process where the town isn't necessarily directly involved, but at least has an understanding of what is going on. And this is how other university communities are doing this. So for what that's worth, I'm just seeking some input here.
So is the goal here to eliminate the burden of town staff and inspection for this project?
Not necessarily. So Pat still has to do the inspections for these projects. And actually, frankly, they still have to get a building permit, but what is currently a little bit of the burden is the planning board review process. So on some level, we're seeking to eliminate that planning board review process. And if folks were open to it, they don't currently pay building permit fees, I don't believe. So
They don't?
no,
Huh.
as a nonprofit, at least
Nonprofits don't pay building fees? Oh, so
as a publicly owned university, I guess I could say.
huh.
Yeah, I think you're right, nonprofit stuff. Anyway, this is all to say that I'm sort of trying to alleviate some of the capacity issues that we are currently aware of. But then also make it a little bit easier and incentivize the university to do their own planning efforts, which I was there today and I was talking with them. They already sort of do this and they're in the process of about to update another master plan. So yes.
What is the commitment of the university to the results of a master plan? Because seems to me that the time that I've been here, presidents come in and there's a whole master plan developed. And that president leaves and that master plan is totally forgotten. Another president comes in and another. So what's the?
Which I think is very realistic with current structure. I mean, for example, the person who will be in charge of all of our facilities will be starting in the next month. And so I think 10 years isn't the timeline of an institutional master plan, it's more like 4.
Oh, okay.
Before it's gonna change, it might be 5 plans in 20 years. I mean, but I think the master plan is a great idea, but what's the exemption piece of that? Let's say, a public-private partnership is on the table for a new, housing, whatever. I think it's reasonable to say, yes, come up with a master plan and stick with that and stay within those boundaries, and we don't wanna hear from you, but something outside of that, then we have to.
Yeah, so I do wanna note the current master plans that like the university has done in the past aren't as detailed as I would be expecting out of a master planning effort that this recommends. So I would be specifically anticipating that they would be sort of forming their own performance standards, right? So how much parking are you gonna get to these uses? What are the setbacks going to be? How are the impacts gonna be managed? Which they get into on some level, but not at the level of detail that I'm currently expecting. Or that I
Do
would
you
be
think
expecting.
Maine would do this? Do you think the university would do this?
My question is, we have a huge staffing shortage, we're in the high, who's gonna do it, I suppose, right? We're just
Well,
told to do more with less.
I think given certain standards, then it would be easy to plug and play it. And now if you have an outline of what the expectations are, then you can kind of just plug in all the things. Because a major capital project isn't gonna happen without a study, right? And so those studies are being done now. We just had a giant housing study. And so, in theory, that's projected at least 10 years forward, maybe more. So some of those things, they probably would. Now, they're probably not taking into, factoring in some of the things that you said, setbacks and stormwater and things like that.
I guess
but
my bigger
maybe they
question
are,
is-
who knows?
Who develops it, right? Like who at the University of Maine can write that plan?
Larry Newman.
Right,
It would be
Yeah,
facilities,
yeah,
and
it would
I've
be
already had a
facilities.
conversation.
and they're
Yeah.
okay with it?
They are extremely supportive.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
Yeah, I think they have capacity because they have, multiple engineers in there that can do that kind of work, and that's what they're there.
They have their own stormwater permit, they have their own DEP permits for land development. that
They
have to
will be having
modify,
their
so there's a lot of
traffic
oversight,
permit, DOT,
yeah.
so we don't even have to necessarily review traffic to some extent. They've already gotten it sort of pre-approved,
Yeah.
so.
What's the outlet if a neighbor, if something goes down and the neighbor's not happy? Like, how does that all play out? Do we just say, your problem, go talk to the university?
We still have our own, as the town, like environmental performance standards, other good neighbor performance standards, things like that. And we could certainly enforce those standards in that, like, if it's lighting flare, or if it's one of these small details that I think the planning board. is
But,
currently-
the public wouldn't have any outlet, but then we have this one. I don't know, that would be my only concern about it, is the public wouldn't have an outlet. And because I'm generally supportive of this and eliminating bureaucracy anywhere we can.
Yeah.
But that would be the only concern I have, is how would the public, if express concern or desire or get their
It
questions.
could be written in the standards, I'm thinking setbacks and noise and lighting and, yeah.
This is still, as I've recommended, it still have to be something that is approved by the town. So planning board and town council is how we handle it in other communities.
Oh, it's still coming for them.
The master plan itself,
Oh, the master plan.
and the outskirts, right?
and that means anything outside of the master plan still would come to the planning board, just if it's within the bounds that we've approved, they kind of have the blessing. Is that-
The example that I used was like a hotel Ursa would have still had to come before, would still have to come before.
So, because it's a big enough change,
And it's a public-private partnership. Yeah.
It's crossing the boundary.
They wanted to build it more with internal money.
Or new football stadium with big lights.
Well, hopefully we would have addressed that regarding the view of the master plan and set some standards for the neighbors there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? How's that sound, you?
It is. Yeah, I would think we would get it. Got something with overlooking university, have that. I think you have to have some level.
Yeah, so if we approve it and set standards, I think we an interesting concept, we haven't gone there maybe before.
But I mean, if they're on board already at this point, you know, I mean, then I think if we continue to engage them in the conversation, then
And we
that
could
makes a
look at
lot of
other,
sense.
look at other
Right.
communities and see how they structure it.
I mean, the fire department must have some input on that.
Yeah.
They're gonna expect their trucks to show up there,
All the permits,
so there ought to be enough turning space for them to get the truck around the building and, you know, just things like that.
And I think, yeah, I mean, we can still require a building permit process, so we have a clear understanding of what is happening. And Pat can review those kinds of things like access.
So based on the research you've done, what's not in here that's in other plans of towns which like that have you here?
What's not included in the recommendation?
yeah.
Like
what other things should we be considering? Other things that we haven't gotten to yet?
it really what we need to be considering is all of the typical impacts that the planning board already considers as part of their review. It's just all done up front. So it's things like parking, because I think, and I will note that one of the things that I sort of run into when we review planning board projects for the university is like, they continually are sort of like taking parking from over here and moving it over here, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't have a clear understanding of like how many parking spaces are on campus or what the current traffic amount on campus is. And I know that they're working on that. That's what our meeting was about.
Right now.
But you know, it would be, that would all be considered as part of this, because just as a recognition that like, if I'm a student, especially a student living in the dorm, it is not unlikely that I will be parking all the way across campus, might be parking there for 2 weeks before I go home again. You know, and those parking impacts are different than the parking impacts from the Alphont or some of these other things.
Well, that's being considered now, with new rules would be that, you know, some cars don't move for weeks at a time, so maybe that needs to be the satellite lot versus the, you know, come and go basketball or even. Yeah.
Is there a space in this master plan to address the issues of, you could put parking spots on the campus. And there's cars that be driving through town to park in spots. And we've already got, we're overwhelmed with commuter traffic through town already. And it's prohibiting our development downtown because we can't cross a main street as a lifeline prospect. Is there anything, any provisions in a master plan campus, something that would minimize commuter traffic? You know, for years, we talked about putting some satellite parking spots out at the highway interchange. And then as a bus back and forth, various parts, so they're not driving through town.
Okay, so you're not saying like direct them through one specific entrance of the university or another, you're saying like fully provide an alternative transportation methods for commuters. Yeah, I think there's space for that, yeah, because we would have to consider the traffic and the traffic management, right? So it's encouraging those sort of alternatives.
Really reduce the street time. They have some others.
Penny Road, you know, the one across from the Old Town Bell. They were working with the city of Old Town at one point, that was a possible connection. Several years ago. Interesting concept, it seems like we open to just explore it.
Certainly, explore it.
Yeah,
Do we feel like we've enumerated what the offside impacts of things happening with this pond? Like you mentioned, stormwater, that's gonna be an issue.
Yeah. I have no concern, I mean, they have to get, they have a site location permit. So anything they do with the DEP has to be approved and permitted, and they're, you know, a little bit more strict than towns are. And then they also have one of those MS4 permits.
What's their outlet for stormwater?
What's that?
What's their outlet for stormwater, for example?
They have a ton of them, so there's the stream ditch that goes from the main, well, the parking lot for Main Center for the Arts, that's a big one. So the pond outlets kind of drain through that forested area and then, you know, parallel come out, you know, right across from All Town and Roma Joe's, that takes a lot of flow, there's a lot of cross culverts that go through Orono system and then discharge to Stillwater, there's a number along College Ave, there's a whole bunch of discharge points there, but.
I understand that in the coming years.
Yeah.
Communities like Old Town. We're gonna have to treat our stormwater.
We're a ways off, We're a ways off.
Yeah, the money for that is,
You could do an end of pipe treatment, but no, that people talk about plants and things, I'm not sure where you heard that, but. I think that's a ways off.
I'm hearing generally supportive with some.
Yeah, I think that could be managed if all the standards and try to figure out what the issues are, but you look at other models, like you said, SMCC or seven other communities, see how they do it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in like UNH or UVM. I mean,
Yeah.
they're more similar to what we're looking at. I mean, SMCC is
Yes.
not rural enough to look at the same kind of problems we do looking at.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or even UMass Amherst.
Yeah, I feel like Amherst is. Do you know if outside of Maine, other college towns use that?
I would say this is the more typical model. We are a very in Orono right now, and it was a question I had when I first started, it was very confusing to me, the whole like 500 foot, and how is that established, and why is that what we consider an impact, and why is it not 250 or 1,000, or it's all of those things, and I think universities have different needs.
I don't remember any discussions about this over the last conflict. Interesting.
Okay, so moving into places to transform. These are areas that are major transformative infrastructure projects and major transformative development projects. One of these is the Stillwater Avenue corridor. And if you'll recall from the transportation chapter when we reviewed that, BACTS has its long range regional transportation plan and has this as an area that has been identified as an area for future major transportation investments. So there are some existing sidewalks like along the University Mall property. This is a bus area, but in general, what I was thinking of when I thought of this area was there's this part of Falmouth when you first get off the highway that when you drive in, it was very clear that it used to be a Shaw's on one side of the huge parking lot and a Walmart on the other side of the huge parking lot. And what they have done was fully redeveloped the corridor so that the Shaw's and the Walmart are still there and accessible, but that now it's office buildings, multifamily development, much more safe passage for both bikes and pedestrians. And really, the regional transportation plans focus on Stillwater Avenue as a formalized bicycle lane area. So this is an area where, and I will acknowledge, I have heard that the current owner of the major property in this area referenced in this section is not necessarily super interested in selling off pieces that are right adjacent to Stillwater Avenue. But I'm sort of thinking of both of the places to transform as longer term, like 20 to 30-year planning projects, where we might have to make some investment and then they might have to make some investment and we sort of go from there. So that's what I'm thinking of for this area. And it starts to address some of the, again, transportation issues, some of the issues that have been identified along just the area not being a great gateway to the community. So focusing on long-term redevelopment.
Most people think that's Old Town.
That's true.
When you talk to people, they don't realize that
Yeah.
that mall and that area
Yeah,
is Old.
well, to be open with you, I'm also working on Old Town's comprehensive plan, and it would be nice for us in Old Town if people thought this was a nice gateway as well, so.
Talk to me about the emphasis on pedestrians in that particular area.
Yeah, I recognize that this is a little bit weird as a highway thing, but, so I had a neighbor when I was growing up that likes to work in Maine or Arizona. And actually, I would say the more focus for me on this, in this area is bicycles, but when we add a bicycle lane and then there's that separation of car, bicycle lane, it makes pedestrian and a little bit more safer. Anyway, this is all to say, I had a neighbor when I was growing up that bikes this area every day. If you are on this area, around work hours, there's usually at least one person that I see like in that area. I think a lot of people use it, and Vax's regional transportation plan emphasizes that it is a heavily used corridor for especially bicyclists. To me, pedestrian connectivity is a little bit more of a secondary thing in the longer term thing for this area, but comes along with active transportation improvements for cyclists.
How many Orono residential properties are there within, say, a quarter mile of this area?
There,
Pedestrians gotta come from somewhere.
Right,
yeah,
it's close enough to like the Stillwater Bank corner.
yep, so there,
Because there's quite a few houses in there, there's that about that, by that insurance area. Well, I understand that, but there's still pedestrians that are traveling through Warner.
I actually walk that way, I live.
I mean, the properties might be in Old Town, but the pedestrians are in Warner.
Yeah, the only residence I can think of is Sylvan Road, the houses on Sylvan
Yeah.
Road.
yes, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, it's like a dozen houses maybe.
Yeah, but you know, my neighborhood, we use, everybody in my neighborhood who like runs or jogs or walks. We walk from the neighborhood all the way down Bennick, Godfrey, and then we can't go any further because there's so much traffic, so we turn around at the Dysarts. Go back.
I think
Or
we
you
just
just
want to
drop
have
down
that
in
all the
the
time, yeah, and turning around back and
Drop down, get that on the road.
Oh, yeah.
So the other thing that's included within this, this general area is across the way, oh, sorry, I thought I was sharing. Hold on. Across the way, as somebody just pointed out, is Sylvan Road, which has 3 parcels, 3+ parcels right in there that would provide connection to Bennett Road that were also just purchased by somebody. So there is potential for redevelopment of these areas back here between Stillwater Ave and Bennett Road, for some major housing or what have you type of development.
So there's an opportunity to get a street, a road across from there over to Bennett Road.
That would be the ideal situation, yeah,
Yeah.
would be,
Yeah.
When I read that in there, I was thinking. We're talking about going down into the open, because. The way it sits right now, your best access to Bennett Road, but you're gonna have to get into Old Town. Where that vacant lot with the old building, which they tore down 2 years back.
yeah, I don't see theirs, so there are these properties, sorry, I can't click on them all. at once.
Someone just bought that and that
These large properties.
was through
Yeah.
choice, so they can have this cut from way too bad.
Hmm.
They've got that little corner right up against Bennett, right?
Directly next to it.
Good to go.
That would be,
Put 100 houses over there.
Sounds good.
I think Sylvan Road people would love that, they had another outlet.
They've been fine. Remember how they were for the new place, they love that.
Yeah.
So this would only be from the bridge on. The bridge would not be part of this plan. Since the bridge doesn't support any traffic beyond 2 cars side by side.
Yeah.
Is that true?
So where would that road come up? Off the end of Sylvan Road,
So,
what is the land on Bennett Road?
yeah, so
Must be somewhere where the property of the Griffin is valuable.
yeah, so it's these 3 I think it's these 3 that somebody just purchased. Sorry,
It's highlighted in blue.
yeah, so this one was purchased. This one directly connecting to Sylvan was just purchased. And I believe this one up here was also purchased, but I could be wrong. No, that one was not. So but it is the 2 that connect essentially Sylvan Road to Bennett Road.
Yeah, that could be a lot of houses.
And then you would certainly have people who want to access
Like,
different businesses, offices.
Parcels, yeah.
And again,
Gravel. They're back, Griffin owns a major part of the gravel.
Right.
That's what it was.
So. Yeah, I kind of have two different parts on the map. I have this Sylvan Road area, which is really where we focus on, again, interconnectivity. Extending that roadway to Bennett Road, which that would mainly be focused on residential, expanding what we already have over there. But then the Stillwater Ave University Mall properties. And surrounding properties are really where we would be focusing on some major infill development in those underutilized parking lots.
Any real tools in them?
What do you mean by?
Probably not.
It's already developed for the most part, right? So it's already paved parking lots. If anything, it
Yeah,
would
what
be
do
in.
you mean by infill development on those parking lots?
So parking lots are underutilized, as you probably know. What other communities are doing, the Falmouth example that I gave, or some of these other communities are allowing for less parking in those areas. To create buildings in the front.
Oh, I see, so that was your
frontage-
Falmouth reference, they can put office buildings or.
Right,
So
frontage.
they use the parking lots for that.
Right, and then they share a parking lot and it works out quite well.
No,
So that's sort of the vision for that part. Again, sort of major transformative. I recognize that this might be a longer term effort. Especially if we have an unwilling property owner, but something that we should at least put in plan. Then the next thing that I would note is another major transformative is the Stillwater Ave corridor to the west of the exit on 95, and I will pull up the map so that you can see that as well. So this would be more like this area, including the lot that was just cleared and some of these other larger parcels in the C1 area. And because further down in this chapter, the only area that we currently allow industrial, as in like true traditional industrial, not light industry, is Ayers Island. And that is not the vision for Ayers Island anymore. I am hoping that these properties here on both sides of Stillwater would be appropriate for industrial type uses, light industry or traditional industry, because of their proximity to the highway. Now, this is heavily dependent on projects being interesting, because we would need to extend water and sewer in order to make this feasible. And that would likely include some version of utilizing TIF funds, creating a TIF in this area, and utilizing public-private partnerships with folks that might be interested in going into these areas. So again, a longer term vision, because it's very much project dependent.
What did they clear that land for, you know, is it just for timber?
He got a permit from the state for timber, although it would seem to me that you would not clear the whole land for timber. What I had heard was actually some sort of light industry or some sort of manufacturing.
I was guessing solar panels.
Right, on that road,
Yeah.
just like that.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I heard that too.
trade.
I have not heard that through any formal inquiry, so
Does the state require that we have some place in town that is allocated to industrial? So we couldn't just get rid of Ayers Island, so that TRs.
the state doesn't formally require industrial use. My recommendation is that communities have some area
Yeah,
for industrial use. Yeah, because obviously business, job generators, et cetera, but also the industrial users pay a lot more in taxes than like a typical, even commercial use. You know, that's a large facility with a lot of business type equipment, so they're paying business equipment tax and property taxes on large buildings.
Orono is historically wasted the two I-95 exits.
Yeah.
We have the next two exits north of the road. And they wasted them. They don't add on to what they should have.
We don't have the infrastructure.
Hmm.
We don't have the infrastructure. We didn't even have three-phase power up there that far out until they put the.
Oh, yeah, but I go back kind of this town and I remember when Gale
McCullough wanted to build a truck stop there on the Kelly Road exit. The town wouldn't let him, so he gave it to the Boy Scout. Told me, he said, if they don't want my taxes, they're not gonna get any tax. So he gave it to the Boy Scouts.
So I know you just said,
I wasn't here then.
And I couldn't understand, so I told him the town council, I said, what are you doing? I said, give him a break on his taxes, just require that he registers those trucks in town. I said, his excise tax on those trucks would dwarf the real estate taxes. But their trucks. No one doesn't like trucks.
We could have had our own diehards and put your town with them.
Yeah.
so I know you just sort of said Orono has historically wasted those. Is this closer to what you're hoping to see at these exits?
Well, obviously, the west side of the interstate is a problem. Any type of density for it because you don't have water and sewer. That is a problem, but the other sides, and you know, and I don't want to say bad about the guy that's got his disc golf business down there, but the taxes on that can't be much. Because he's got no structures, basically just land, and it could be something commercial there right off that exit.
Now that all the timber started working.
But I think generally, people who are doing it don't think of Orono, comes to that. They don't want to jump the loops.
Yeah, I don't know how realistic it is, just, and our property taxes. Like if you're building, you know, $100 million facility and you're paying another point on that a year. You're like, no, like that's $1 million a year. So you go to Herman or some other place where you just, I don't know, it just, that point hurts me, it's that much. I don't know how, yeah, maybe like in the street, maybe some super small and stuff, but then it doesn't support the constant pushing utilities across the bridge, so.
So
It's a good idea, I just don't know how realistic it is.
we get inquiries around these properties a lot. I think some things might be, and you know, that's just inquiries, that's just understanding.
But the
But
ability to get water and sewer over there is improved tremendously in the last 20 years with the directional water. You are not going to have to open next to me to get across there. There's no meters.
Would you go onto the highway, I mean, you can go up?
You'd have,
I thought you just go
you'd have to
across
put a
the
sleeve on the water main, you'd have to put a sleeve because you don't want the water main to break on that.
Right,
And wash the road out, so they have to have a sleeve, you know, these have the water line do that.
across the bridge,
No, underneath that,
oh, they would go on,
I'd have to go board and.
The OEDC looked at going onto the highway with water and sewer under the highway probably 15, 20 years ago. And it was ruled then, and I think it's even cheaper now. Technology is much better now, really. So I think it's something that should be looked at.
what's doable? $10, $1 million, what's doable?
Well, then it was. Million, $1.5, something like that. It was daunting at the time, this was 20 years ago,
Right.
but it was, you saw it as something to do.
Yeah.
It's just getting to do it.
and on some level, it's like you almost don't want to do it unless you're gonna keep it a project. So if you're,
Well, but at that point, we had actually approached Jackson Labs about the facility at that interchange on that. But they didn't.
Yeah, that makes some sense in the university, like that's what now, so many things in the university.
They went to Florida.
so generally supportive of the idea with the recognition, this is probably a longer term. Okay, that's here. Park Street corridor. I don't want to spend too much time on this one, recognizing that we're sort of running out. This is really getting to the Route 2 planning study and also reiterating what was provided in the last 2014 comp plan. So not encouraging auto-oriented development, really encouraging a mix of employment uses, variety of housing types at like medium to high density, supporting public transit and implementing the Route 2 project. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on this one. I think it's just reiterating what we've already done in terms of efforts. Okay. I do want to spend some time on this one. So this is what I'm calling Orono West, for lack of a more creative term. this is the area that is, currently. Okay. So it's currently some of these EDZ parcels. And there's a couple of LBR as well. They're all owned by Sargent. So all of these main parcels are owned by the same property. And what I'm envisioning for this area is a really creative housing, mix of housing, but focus on single family home development and missing middle homes and starter home construction with some mixed use along the frontage of Kelly Road, so that we're actually, again, taking advantage of the highway, the proximity to the highway, but also letting folks, getting a lot of new housing. I recognize that in the past, this was most likely zoned EDZ, because I think in the past, people did not think that folks wanted to live near the highway. And I respect that. It is no longer the case in desirable communities. When I worked in Saco, met twice a month on planning board, we had a subdivision on every single agenda, and it was all in proximity to the highway like this. And those houses are now going for $800,000. That's Southern Maine and that's Saco. But it is a myth that people don't want to live close to the highway when there might be, opportunities to live. So I provided in the packet a case study of a project that is in Scarborough, I believe. That is really focused on the kind of mixed use development that I would like to encourage. So
We talked about that. That was the Scarborough example from even 10 years ago, I think.
yeah. So he's been working, I know this person really well. He's been working on this project for a long time, and it is a beautiful project. The front is a lot, this where my cursor, actually, I might just get up. So this photo here this is Route 1. This is a restaurant, apartments, a senior living facility went over here. And then you drive back into this more wooded area where he has a mix of townhomes, which is this, single family homes, duplexes, and the sort of duplexes that are connected by attached garages. So you're not sharing a wall with anybody, but your garage shares a wall. And it is all rooted around this pond. So he has some nice recreational amenities in there as well. It's a mix of medium to high density. I would say, well, high density for Orono is different than high density for Scarborough. So it was high density for Scarborough at the time, which would be these kind of like townhomes. I would say this is more our like medium density. So this is not a huge deviation from some of the things that are already allowed in Orono, but again, allows for the opportunity to do some master planning efforts on the part of a large property owner in Sargent, and get, walkability, conservation areas, recreation areas, some really great missing middle housing types, all of that in one neighborhood. So this is really where we'd be looking. We would need density to be, okay, I think I should have said, our medium density probably isn't enough of a density to allow for this kind of development to be feasible, because you need to extend water and sewer. So I would say it's more like our historic development patterns of like Thaler development or Webster side, which is much smaller than our current medium density residential requirements. Around 8,000 square feet per dwelling unit is probably more what we'd be looking at. But this is what the vision for that area is. And I will say this is a little bit of I'm throwing this out there. I don't think anyone specifically said we need this kind of development. I think it hits on a lot of the goals that Orono has. And this is really where the bulk of our new housing units would likely end up. So.
We talked about this 10 years ago. Evan did a presentation on all these alternatives, and there was, I don't think, any argument about that.
And this is the disc golf course back in, right?
This,
Is
yeah,
that where I was seeing that?
the disc golf course is on the other side of the highway. Sorry,
Oh, so this is on the west side.
right, this is the west side, so I will pull this back up.
The DB thing that we approved.
Yeah,
Just a little DV shed and the thing.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's on that side.
It's right near.
and it's across from the storage, so.
Yeah.
Yes, yep.
Okay, your town public works.
Yes, and
Okay.
it's these properties, these three big properties, and then some of the LDR as well, so I think it's these two. Sorry if you can't see my cursor, but those, some of the LDR and then a lot of the major big C properties that you're seeing. Now, there's obviously some wetlands here that you're seeing on the screen, and I'll zoom in a little bit more. Those would have to be mitigated through the effort of the large project, but not impossible area. So,
And what's the lay of land there for like sewage?
there is no
Right
sewer.
somewhere it goes to. What are the exit numbers now? 193 is the first exit.
Yeah.
191.
191, yeah.
There's a break in there somewhere across the sea where. You could flow sewage down to the 191 and then to 193 the other thing. But we had talked at one point about putting a pumping station in the bottom of the hill there at 191.
Okay.
And then you could take, that pumping station could accept. What, that whole side of Kelly Road.
Yeah.
The west side of Kelly Road, or the north side of Kelly Road, south side of Kelly Road. And then. Again, crossing under the highway. That you can see.
Yeah, so a little bit different than what's currently allowed there, but I think not an impossibility with the right kind of development and the right kind of density. So just,
You can pump the sewage up the hill and over and then down through Squire Park and sewer connections.
yes, yep, so there, sewer is in all of these dead end roads, over here, so, yeah.
So why are we putting it over there versus on the east side, right next to the highway? Well, no, you can go right into that program.
So some of these are.
There's land for sale right there. The land there.
There's two big obstacles to developing anything in that area. One is swimming pools and the other is the access to it.
Yeah,
The
so,
access is all split up among how many properties.
yeah, so some of these big properties are deep restricted now town parks, and they have to be maintained as town parks in perpetuity. And then, yes, some of it is just limitations on,
That's just what we told
Wait.
you.
I mean, we approved,
But it's not, we have to do it. There's no way around. We have to come to grips with that issue.
there was a plan, remember before, because that was the Boy Scout, because they had to either develop it or do something, but now it's the solar arrays up there, but they were, that's where Masabi, remember that the extension of Page Place, that bridge, the whole thought was he was gonna extend that road and they were gonna have all the mixed uses that you just talked about. Maybe
It just
some
seems like that's
commercial, some housing, it was a really nice idea, and you connect a whole bunch of dead end roads, but that just didn't go anywhere.
It's such a better, because then everything's walkable and bikeable. Like, it's such a better, you're on the other side of the highway, it's. You to get across that is, not fun, not in a car.
But if it's walkable, your comment about walkability, I mean, that was within that little neighborhood, is the walkability.
and to your point, I mean, so this would now technically be part of the growth area, so the growth area boundaries are extended. We've heard some folks from our active transportation meeting talking about extending sidewalks up Kelly Road. Without the growth area being on the other side of the highway, that doesn't necessarily seem feasible with the limitation on how we're spending our capital improvement money. So it's partially to respond to some of that as well.
I see.
So it could be walkable, and again, that's a little bit longer term, but
But getting some kind of, right of way access, circulation pattern on the east side of the highway. From Main Street and Congress is. It's unavoidable, if you want development there, we're gonna have to do that.
Those two parcels, the one you have highlighted and the one just north of it.
Yeah.
Is one of those parts?
Yes, so the one that I have highlighted is,
Smart.
yep, and then this one is,
Yes.
no,
That's Tozier, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
there's, Jeremiah Colburn
Yeah,
in
and
here too somewhere,
Colburn Natural Area.
yeah. And that might be,
Tozier is that's a huge parcel.
Yeah, right up there in the main road.
Yeah.
Right up in the main road. That's on the other side
There's
of
all kinds of
town.
extraneous parcels in that area that we don't even know who owns them, and they're long, narrow strips of land.
yep.
You
Spike.
gotta resolve all these things.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna be attracted to this mess. Right. In order to do any kind of development state.
What about, I was always curious with, the old Penobscot Auto and Dayton and stuff, by Silvers. I think, why did you want?
Oh, yeah, they go still like the highway.
Nobody's ever been interested in that. There was Silvers and Penobscot Auto, now it's just vacant. There's just a turnaround. There were two auto salvage groups side by side.
Probably
Long time
probably
ago.
some soil issues.
No, that's, I assume so, but you can get around that.
They got
The
run
mail
that
down in
down.
my neighborhood.
It wouldn't have been any worse than Silver's one.
Right.
They were on that.
I mean, that was a really large parcel.
The town project.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Because that wasn't necessarily on your list, maybe it was just part of a corridor, but there's just some large parcels out there. It was-
Yeah.
Plenty of water right there.
Yeah. So did you include those in?
Those are, okay, so there's some limitations out there, if you're looking at the critical rural areas. On some of the larger parcels, there are habitat areas, I'm not 100% sure what they are. What I did do, and I'll bring up the map again, is essentially extended what's currently the C1 area out here. There's like 3 parcels in a row that are C1 as you're going out towards BC. I extended the growth area back to the back of all of those parcels at this point. So most of them are already developed, so yeah, that's what I've done for now. And then as you can see, there's some critical habitat back here. There's also this area sort of down here, down close to the BZ line is an aquifer protection area. So there's some limitations on what land uses can go there as well. Doesn't limit a lot of residential per se, but definitely commercial would be more limited down in that area. Okay, I just want to make sure, I don't want to keep you too late. I also just want to make sure I get all of my major questions answered, so. Okay, so there's a call out box in the future land use draft around key catalyst sites. We've already heard some visioning around Ayers Island, but I anticipate that these sites will need more conversation and more public engagement, and that is what I'm recommending.
Call the one bridge the Shady Mill Bridge, and it's the Shoddy,
The Shaddy Mill Bridge.
Shoddy with an O.
Oh, okay, oh, Shoddy with an O.
A little different concept. than-
Yeah.
Well, that's what it referred to. Just like this.
Yeah, these ones have obviously major environmental constraints, major access constraints with the bridges. Major brownfield redevelopment needs, they're worthy of more conversation, if only because in order to actually make these redevelopable, I'm sorry. I'm not saying it anymore. Anyway, you know what I mean? Yeah, they would need higher density most likely to make that financially feasible. So having some further conversation there
The buildings over there, all gone.
on Ayers Island.
Yeah.
There's one lot plus barn, that's the barn up too.
Yeah, they're not fully gone.
And,
And if you have
like
been,
in a year, but the bridge hasn't been accessible in years, but
Yeah.
I didn't know.
yeah. So all 3 of these are similar needs, different environmental constraints, but definitely worth further conversation around mixed use redevelopment and probably a lot of higher density development. Not high density, but higher than what is allowed, because of the need for it to be financially feasible for folks. So. Contract zone, most likely. And the Margin and Main Street recent subdivision and the Orono Brewing Company parcels are part of that. Conglomerate. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about places to enhance. What I have realized, there's been some conversations around reducing nonconformities, eliminating nonconforming properties. When you look at maps of both the Sailor development and most of the Webster neighborhood, the properties do not meet our current minimum lot standards, and so they would be considered non-conforming lots. The Sailor development in particular, most of the lots have 80 feet of road frontage and they're 9,000 square foot lots. As I mentioned earlier, our MDR zoning district requires 15,000 square feet, so every lot in there is non-conforming currently. Also, approximately 15 acres are unrestricted, so not the park area, but the areas closer to the current development are currently unrestricted and owned by the town, and are still able to be developed in accordance with the originally approved plans. In this area, in an effort to eliminate the existing nonconformities and allow for that kind of, well, that kind of build out is actually already allowed because it's an approved subdivision, but to reduce the nonconformities, this area in particular would be good to reduce to 9,000 square foot minimum lot areas. Just to reflect the historic development pattern of the area. Likewise, and I'll pull up the map for Webster neighborhood so that you can sort of see what I'm talking about. The lots in Webster neighborhood, and specifically, Pierce, Peters, Pond, Hillside. If you look at many of these, Pierce really small, but if you look at many of these, they are 8,000 square foot lots with, for the most part, only about 60 feet of frontage. Then you have a variety of double lots, like this one is clearly a double lot, 112 is clearly a double lot. 103, clearly double lots, where under our current zoning ordinances, those could not be split or built out. And frankly, given where the houses are placed on those double lots, they probably couldn't be split without tearing down the house anyway. But I occasionally get inquiries from folks living in this area that, I want to sell off my side yard, or I would like to create a double lot. Is this possible? Because these lots are, for the most part, about 8,000 square feet. There are some that are less, and then obviously some that are much more. That's not currently allowable. And the historic frontage was 60 feet. So my recommendation that I'm looking for feedback on is to reduce the minimum lot size requirements down to 8,000 to, again, eliminate some of these non-conformities. Like right now, 110, 109, 105, 106, all of those would be non-conforming properties under the current zoning ordinance. 90, 91, 92, all of these along Peters. And you can see that definitely looks different than some of our newer subdivisions where the lots meet our minimum lot area requirement of 15,000 square feet.
In both these cases, then these would no longer be classified or lumped into the MDR zone, they'd be their own special zone.
We would have MDR1 and MDR2.
So you break out multiple MDRs.
Probably.
And why would you have one at 8,000, one at 9,000? Why would we just have one that's 8,000?
Okay, so there.
Yeah, we could just do MDR1 is now 8,000 square feet. It was to reflect what's currently there. Yeah, so Sailor development was all 9,000 square foot
Right.
lots. Yeah.
And remind me, what's the advantage of removing a non-conforming status?
Yeah. So if you currently have a non-conforming lot, there are a lot of, well, not a lot of limitations. There are some limitations around what you can do with that property. So if, for example, the house is destroyed, fire, etc., you have to build in accordance with then the current setbacks. And that's the biggest issue. The other thing is, and it's really more about some of these larger lots where we get inquiries around splitting them, that it doesn't necessarily pass the straight face test from my end to tell somebody, nope, sorry, you can't, our current zoning doesn't allow it, when they look across the street and their neighbor very clearly only has 60 feet of frontage. That is a source of frustration.
Without any complication, being non-conforming, if you have a home occupation. Or you run your business, as I did for 30.
If you have actually had to come and get a permit, it may be a complication, yeah.
So there's good solid reason for the
Non-conforming.
status of.
Yeah,
That seems reasonable.
and you know, this is in pretty stark contrast to when you go across the way to, for example. Yeah, these are great examples, you know, these are clearly a little bit larger lots that would meet our current pitch. The lots over on newer subdivisions off of Forest and off of Bennett Road currently meet our requirements. These lots, as you can tell, are much smaller. Pierce Street is much smaller than these lots in College Hills. So it's really about reflecting the historic development pattern, trying to pass the service test for that area.
Remind me, what are the ramifications of somebody who wants to combine two of these small lots?
Yeah, so if I am a property owner that, for example, will use 129 and 130 on Pierce Street. If I own these smaller lots and I want to build my house in between, the only ramification is if they're currently two non-conforming lots and you combine them, you can't then sell them off separately. So let's say I buy 129 and 130 and I buy them separately. I pay the cost, buy them separately. And then I build my house right smack in the middle of them. That is then a combined lot under our ordinance standards, which notes that when you purchase two non-conforming lots next to each other, they're in contiguous ownership, they become one. Anyway, it really all comes down to like resale value of lots for the most part, so, yeah.
I was curious.
Yeah, it's an automatic, when you purchase two next to each other and they're contiguous, it's automatic.
We've talked at all about just decreasing lot sizes.
So this was one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight, and I'll skip down to that now. So, one of the things that I'm hearing from folks is that you want to see more infill development, and I think this is part of the. And so the first thing I thought was, okay, we want to see more infill development in the designated growth area, walking distance to downtown, that meets all of their goals. And so I thought, okay, and they also want to conserve rural areas. We should do transfer of development plans. And this is with the private market. So I am a developer and I purchase development rights from a property in the rural area. It does not mean I can develop in the rural area. It means that there are deed restrictions placed on that rural property that then allows me to develop in the growth area double density or X. It gives me some additional incentive to develop in the growth area. And then I thought, there's a reason that not a lot of towns in Maine do that. It's pretty complicated and it's very market dependent, right? So then I thought, okay, maybe we just drop down the minimum lot size to 8,000 and that's our historic development patterns. And that's the piece that I really wanted to get some feedback from folks on, because I know that there was conversation last time about, what the minimum lot area in the MDR should be and all of this. The historic development pattern in at least those two neighborhoods that I just mentioned, and there are some other properties that was around 8,000 to 9,000. Is that so bad? I guess is really what I'm asking.
I'm for it.
Okay.
I mean, I do have I live in a neighborhood that has conforming lot sizes. Now, and I moved from a neighborhood that had a very non-conforming lot size. But I think people, he knows where I used to live, that my yard isn't much bigger than the house. And it's really not, and we do like our bigger yard now, but people wanna live here. People are willing to accept smaller lot sizes. And I mean, if I wanted to move to Orono and it was like, oh gosh, I can't get a huge yard, I'd still wanna move to Orono. Right, so I'm super into smaller lot sizes.
And I have to add here that every one of my nephews and nieces who live on all the parts of the country in the Midwest, they all live in houses on lots that are smaller than 8,000 square feet. They don't want to mow grass. They wanna have a nice house. They wanna have a garage. They don't wanna mow grass. They're not
No,
worried
my
about it.
house is, yeah, we live in Webster, 10,000, maybe quarter of an acre lot. No issues, raise 2 kids. It's walkable, so you can go to, you know, if you want big yards playing, you go to the fields over by the high school or the little league field. No issues, but, yeah, I'm supportive of that.
My lots, other than Hamish, my lots, all just under an acre, which is very unusual. But all the lots around me are all. 10 acres. It's fine.
That's how we, that's one of the ways we address this.
Right, it's the walkability and creative ideas, whether it's Webster or whatever other neighborhoods.
Okay,
Yeah,
One thing I would say about small lots like that, though, is allowing accessory dwellings on small lots like that, that's my question.
so I wanna talk about the ramifications before we make a decision here, because I mean, I just want you to be aware. LD 2003, adopted by the state a few years ago, requires that municipalities allow accessory dwelling units on every lot that, residential housing is allowed, residential is allowed. So even on these smaller lots, 1 accessory dwelling is allowed. The other thing that you should be aware of is dropping, LD 2003 also does not allow us to have, for example, in the instance that you brought up around density. If the minimum lot area for a single family dwelling is 8,000 square feet, for the secondary dwelling, it cannot be more than 8,000 square feet. So you know, if I have a lot that's 16,000 square feet, I could put 2 units on that. Anywhere in the growth area served by sewer and water is allowed up to 4 units as long as they can meet the underlying density requirements. So you could theoretically have about 5
units per acre.
5 units per acre.
So is there a way to institute this so that it's for those? Like Webster, where the neighborhoods are 8,000 and in the developed land, it's all in this NDR 1 to 8,000. And then for existing, it's different. The only concern I have is, you know, like I have an acre. If I turn that into 5 houses, my neighbors would probably not be pleased with me, like that, you know, or I put up a 5-unit apartment building, like I just took my house and converted it.
Mhm.
Like, that's my only concern is those existing neighborhoods, and if it would be impossible for us to understand all the permutations that this could throw out there. Like, I don't think it'd be a big problem, but that would be my only concern is existing neighborhoods that have this or are close to this already, 100%. Undeveloped land, 100%. But if it's existing neighborhoods, that gets a little bit tougher.
So I will note in the MDR currently, and we would probably retain this, is you can't actually do a 5-unit apartment building because we don't allow multi-family dwellings in that regard. You would have to, we allow up to a duplex with 2 units. So
Well,
you
I could build 4, I could build
can
5
build
houses.
5 houses. or
And they
like-
could each have an accessory apartment.
That's
So now I've got 10 units I just put into this neighborhood.
Yeah.
That would be the top of the town.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there are ways. I think that it is very easy in Sailor and Webster and on undeveloped land. I think you're bringing up a good point that, you know, in those other neighborhoods, Forest Ave, off of Forest Ave that I just mentioned, off of Bennett Road, et cetera. It might be a little bit less palatable, and so maybe it is an MVR 1 and MVR 2. I think that addresses your comment, but when
Yeah, and maybe there aren't that many acre lots, you know, you said you have, maybe it's not, maybe the half an acre lots within the NDR, there's not that many of them.
Well, where does the clustered subdivisions rub up against the side of those smaller lots? Why aren't we making them more wide, type developers make, it's like clustered, because you get, you know, relaxed setbacks.
So cluster development was at some I think we've had this conversation because, you thought that they were two separate things. So clustered and conservation subdivisions, at some point before my time here, were sort of merged into one concept in Orono. So now you have to have some sort of conservation element in a clustered subdivision, and
So
it's
that's only an FNA.
no, in every zoning district, yes, and in most of them, except for the FNA, it's 30% of the lot, of the developable lot area, so letting out roads. Needs to be conservation, permanent, deed restricted, or make it LLC. In every zoning district, FNA, I think, requires a higher amount, permanently conserved. 40%. So it is confusing to me as well, because I think at some point the concepts were sort of merged together. And it's not, as I understand, clustered development to be.
Because originally the first big student housing complex, that was first proposed. It was first proposed as a cluster development. So we had cluster developments on the books, but I don't think you could have a cluster development in FNA.
I think it was around the time that we adopted standards, adding in the FNA addendum. Addressing all the recommendations of that addendum, and they were merged together into one concept that is.
Wonders if that was the intent.
So we talked about this last time, but you said the numbers wouldn't work.
Well, one thing, if in the F and A, you gotta give up 20% of your land. You can't make sense of that.
And the minimum lot area.
I mean, to me, back to something you said earlier, was put the test on. Has it been used? Then the developer said it doesn't work.
And we also, again, do need housing for, right? Like, I think everything that we should consider should include how do we get more people in Orono in a way that is sustainable for the town, obviously, but.
So the 40%, you just have to offset that with the suitable housing density to make the numbers work.
Increase costs. To the end user.
And the issue with the FNA is, unlike some of the other zoning districts like the NPR, where you do get a density bonus for doing cluster, you do not get a density bonus for doing cluster in the FNA. It's a requirement.
Yeah.
3.3 acre minimum, 3.5, 3 acre minimum lot sizes in the FNA. You have to conserve 40%. You don't get a density bonus.
Which essentially is don't build.
And I totally understand what was attempting to be addressed. I think we're in sort of a different time now where we should probably look at that, and I do recommend that, even though it's in a rural area.
Yeah. So you're gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna provide recommendations on that.
You talk about if you do those things in the Webster area, you're going to push back the neighbors. I don't understand why that piece of land is owned by the town of Orono in the sale development. I don't understand why. I don't understand why they own it. That ought to be sold. But if I remember right, that has entrances off Old Mainwood and Gilbert that allow for streets to run parallel to Pinewood and Glenwood and all of those. So you could. I mean, that is all set.
No, exactly. I was gonna bring that up.
Yeah.
My neighbor lived, he had a double lot there, so he would have been really pissed when he's moving the house. Yeah,
But that means all those people, once you go by Pinewood, are used to not having anybody in their backyard. You don't think they're gonna have for them?
At the same time, the subdivision was approved back in the 60s, but approved and recorded.
So why?
So it is totally buildable
right,
at
no,
the
exactly.
density that was approved at the time.
Why is the town of Orono set on something that's taxed?
And it's like mowing the grass.
I don't like.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, you could turn that into taxes and housing in a walkable area, the water and
It
sewer
was
is all
still
there.
development, ready made.
Yeah, I mean, why the town of Orono is blamed for not having more housing?
To add that to this document, that they should sell that piece of land.
Yeah,
And I
and
think-
push those streets to come through, there's all.
And it's all on
The town of
paper.
Orono owns all that right now.
There are other properties. I would like to see the comprehensive plan make a recommendation that the town not own any real estate that does not have a stated public purpose. That's been approved by the council.
That's a motion, I'll second it. That's a motion, I'll second it. The other thing, they get rid of the Keith Anderson building, town of Orono should not own that.
Keith Anderson,
Yeah, that's an albatross.
Well, we can't say, I like it.
Well, yeah, but who shingled it? And you gotta pay it, gonna pay the heat on it, pay electricity on it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That ought to be gone.
Okay.
You should have stopped with selling land.
Yeah.
That's, you go too far, Dennis.
You want a nice community that sell Keith Anderson building, take the money from that and go down straight down. to
Oh, you
Oak
want
Street
to,
School.
you think?
Straight out to Oak Street School, and make it a place where somebody could have a birthday party, for graduation or something like that. There's the money from the Keith
Yes,
Anderson
it's the
building.
old town garage property. All the property, sale development,
Yeah.
other lots scattered.
Yeah.
We can market it for sale.
But you're gonna run into the same problem. You got into something with the old town garage, because your logical thought is housing. But the neighborhood, that's the reason the neighborhood fought having the avenue. I mean, the avenue has exits out on Scott Street, but they're gated, so that they can only be used by emergency vehicles in emergency situation, because the neighborhood didn't want the additional traffic. So go build housing up there in the old town garage, and you're gonna have the same problem. But that's another one that doesn't make sense to town.
Okay, so back to the in-town neighborhoods conversation, I'm not clear on how you want me to go about this, so. It seems like we're generally comfortable with dropping the minimum lot area in the MDR zoning district. But to your point, maybe looking at an MDR 1 and MDR 2.
Or understanding, I think, what that would mean in the existing MDR neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Like if you do an analysis, it was like, oh, there's 20 lots in the mix.
Okay.
Probably then it doesn't matter.
Okay.
If you keep it simple, but if it's 200 and, I don't know.
Let me just make a note of myself. This is really the last big question I had. We can move on to the rural area after this. The rural area has some of what we've already discussed, so revisiting the cluster development and conservation subdivision standards, potentially revisiting the minimum lot sizes in the FNA. But for the most part, we're not directly investing in sidewalk expansion or infrastructure out there. So it's sort of, on some level, minus what I just said, business as usual out there. Does anyone have any major concerns with that?
My only concern is fiber optic. Said no infrastructure, in my mind, that's infrastructure.
Mhm.
It's gonna be difficult to get. Run fiber out of there. But I don't think it's something that, I mean. Sort of.
Okay, I think, so I should have been more specific, it's 75% of our capital investment funds that we spend over the next 10 years need to go to the road. 25% could be rent for items like that.
So something like that could be accommodated.
Yes, yeah,
I don't see water and sewer.
What's the? Is there any planned use for the old what's the school? I say they cleared it. Tell me when they cleared it.
Yeah. So it was explained to me that they were getting rid of it, they said
Yeah, that
it's
was
also gonna be
the big-
staging. Yeah, it's some staging area for.
Oh, they probably want to use it for their web, that makes sense, they want to use it for the website, you know, a lot of work they're gonna do. So,
A lot of
You're
basic
curious
work.
that virtually every living plant on the site was an invasive species.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I asked, cause obviously drive by it a whole bunch.
well, you know, it was a long time ago, to me, it doesn't seem like it's that long ago, the school was standing there.
Yeah.
And the lawn was mowed,
Yeah.
so everything has kind of invaded, since then.
There's some kind of deed restriction on educational purposes or something. Stuff like that can be made.
so I'm not hearing a lot of major concerns around rural or critical rural. Critical rural, I utilize the state's habitat mapping among other things. So it generally matches what I think we're all aware of as habitat areas. That would be areas where we're really going, and I'll just shift.
But one issue with the rural area is residential development coming up against a productive use, so the classic case of sort of a profitable dairy operation. And then the residential development, the proposed development, that's where it just drove the dairy operation right up.
How do they do that? How do they drive it out?
They were dynamiting, moving on ledge, just.
It's putting on the road.
Yeah, it just killed their production, and they had no business. They were entitled to do the blasting, they totally wiped out the business. So they didn't do it. There was this whole concept of productive uses and consumption uses. And the FNA is supposed to be voted towards productive uses. But whatever, we don't grow soybeans and corn. But we could grow apples, have other, agricultural uses. And part of the point is allowing some place in town for those uses.
We just discussed that our current ordinance does not facilitate building with that.
Oh, yeah, that was part of the purpose of the conservation cluster development. Okay, if you're gonna do residential development, you gotta cluster it, you gotta reserve some percentage of parcel. Or pay a pre-product, whether it's a wood lot or tree. Older.
I think my response would be, it sort of depends on how far you want to take it. So I work in a lot of true still farming communities, many farming operations. What we did in those communities was like anywhere there was productive agriculture soil, we marked that as rural and really discouraged development in those areas. That wasn't necessarily what I was hearing from Orono. What I was hearing was sort of revisit on some level residential development out there, recognizing that some folks want to live on bigger lots. But at the same time, allowing some flexibility for agriculture related uses, I guess I would say, because in fact, we don't have any agriculture uses out in FNA anymore. We have two folks that sell at the farmers market that are both from the MDR.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit interesting.
Yes.
It sort of depends on how far you want to take it. You could certainly make the rural very undevelopable and really focus on protecting farming soils or forestry areas or wildlife habitat blocks, I should say. That wasn't necessarily what I was hearing from our public engagement and from the committee so far, but if I'm misunderstanding, let's have that conversation.
First thing you do, sprinkle lots on it, get away from that 3-4 rig up there. They think they ought to have a house up there. It's hard. I mean, I watched this happen in other communities around the state that have a lot of rural areas. They have a lot of tracts of land. Then a lot of the towns allow just an acre, you get a house lot, so you get all these houses lined along the road. And thousands of acres in behind them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you're not careful, you're gonna get those, they're gonna get trapped in there so that you can never do anything. I mean, there really, and also there's some places mentioned farming, there's no farming. And I don't know where they would farm if they want, we don't want a lot of fields.
I agree with that too, right? And I'm on farm freak, like if you want to buy my house, I have some operations there. And every year is my annual land grab, I'm about to take more for agricultural use, but that's not, I don't see where if you're trying to have that kind of venture where you can do the kind of calculus where that land makes enough money as a farm when the margins are small and the property's more expensive in Orono and the taxes are higher in Orono. I just don't see Orono as being a farm town. I would love Orono to be a farm town, but I don't see it happening.
But you don't want to rule it out. You got a big space for it to happen, and we got a profitability for a flower farm.
Yeah, in the MDR, like, it's a micro farm. Right, and it's profitable on, what are they on, an acre? It's not much, it's pretty small, and she's making a pretty good go of it.
Yeah, too much farming on big.
Well, she's got a micro farm and.
Well, for that, but I mean,
Sure.
when I think about farming, I don't think
Sure.
about big.
I think you could do flowers, mushrooms, maybe poultry, right? There's some things you can do, but I don't imagine where the profit margins are slim on farming and agricultural operations that you would want to do that in Orono unless something dramatically changed about the cost of living in Orono. Maybe not completely destroy that district and say, okay, let's go to tighten the lot size, but if we make them a little smaller and try to encourage maybe not development, but a little bit more, that is a way to get more development in town in an area that might be more appealing to somebody who wants that 1 acre or 2 acre lot size.
University has a farm, I would.
But I mean, that's what we heard, that we need to provide diversity of options that get people at all costs, but you don't wanna ruin F and A, so it's gotta be a mix, so. I'm wondering that exercise you did for other rural communities, whether maybe that exercise could help us make a decision, like, okay, this is, you know, reserve these areas for the farming if it ever happened. I don't know.
Maybe a whole district or something like that, where we pick areas that aren't good for farming, but are close to roads and say, okay, we could have larger lot sizes here. And maybe not as many, but we could put, you know, some amount of development out there.
F and A 1 and F and A 2 or something to do that.
I don't know, and if my husband heard me saying this, he would think I'm insane because I'm like the farm lady for sure, but. Again, I'd rather have housing stock for people who need it than save land for use that I'm not entirely sure I anticipate.
I just think our focus ought to be the housing here in town. Should discourage.
I agree with you, but there was enough comment that Laura and others at one of our earlier meetings mentioned that. No, you need to have options outskirts of town too, so I was trying to listen to that and just.
Allowable use
Yeah.
and encouraging, right?
Yeah.
So if you say this is allowable and there's a developer who thinks they can make go of it. With larger lot sizes. You know, I'd be happy to see it.
Okay. So generally addressing our cluster development standards is probably the first and most.
Yes.
Yeah.
Generally probably lowering the minimum lot size from 3.5, 3.75 down to 2, you know. Yeah, something that might be a little bit more
They
feasible.
were 80,000 before that, then they went down to 60,000 square feet.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
were 80,000 before that, yeah.
So 2 acres was probably the historic development pattern out there as well. Maybe that's more appropriate. And again, we did talk about for the agriculture chapter. Encouraging some flexibility around like farming uses and I think that's what we would really want to focus on rather than. Fully protecting like. I make the best soil and things like
Yeah.
that, you know, I think it's the whole district that probably needs some flexibility.
Looking, that area ought to be left. With zoning and ordinances that allow somebody to have livestock if they want. My point is, I just don't see anybody making a living.
Yeah.
At farming, but I mean, I think it's a rural enough area, you ought to be able to. Have a cow if you want, but
Yes,
That's fine. There's a difference between economic viability of performing agriculture or versus being able to have agriculture going on.
I mean, somebody.
Okay.
Somebody wants to go out there and buy 8 or 10 acres, they have a horse, they don't do that.
I would love to see us, you know, on the farming front. Deal with the farm stand issue. Yes. Right, like I would love for people to have farm stands if they want them in residential areas without having to have whatever the setback parking. I forget what requirements, the requirements are crazy enough that you couldn't I couldn't, for instance. The reason I looked into it is because I want to put a farm stand up, I absolutely cannot do that. Right, things like that.
And I think we did identify that as part of
Yes.
that conversation, so, okay, I'll take another stab at that, the rural section, come back to you guys and. I think we'll probably end up looking at this again at the next meeting.
sounds good. All right, we're almost at 8 o'clock. I'm gonna mention one quick thing. We had an incident in the Webster neighborhood last week, and we might be considering a response to that. One of my neighbors got beat up. Second time that's happened, and the 30 years I've been there, roughly.
What happened now?
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah, the end of Crosby and Pond Street, went out late at night. It was last couple Sundays ago, and yeah, he went out to speak to some students and.
Students beat him up?
Yeah, he ended up going.
Four arrested, there were 4 individuals.
Yeah, there was the issue of summons and, yeah, but if you guys remember Mike Curtis back in the day, he went out on street, they were a party and one of my neighbors, got beat up quite a while ago and now it happened again, so.
So you went out to tell them to just quiet down?
Yeah, and I think he took out his phone and was filming them, but yeah, pretty serious incident, so. I mean, this is. Yeah, I was forwarded a main daily campus editorial by Dan Demerit today, but very unfortunate, but it's something that. You know, maybe we look at, there's a little bit of discussion amongst town staff, maybe we need more, I mean, clearly more enforcement, that was a discussion before, but just something that ponder on.
I think, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I think I would just add in here, I think there needs to, if we're, there needs to be education among town members to call the police. I don't, you know, I think that engaging, you know, intoxicated students that are in a, you know, mass. Not even students. I don't even know why I said students, because I don't like that terminology, because I don't like using, you know, we wouldn't use any other clustering of people when we talk about them. And I just, so I don't know. It is certainly unfortunate what happened and horrific. But I also see that you know, calls to police engagement with law enforcement is down in the Webster neighborhood. And so I think that's such an important part of the conversation is community policing and engaging not just the criminals or the bad actors, engaging them, those of us that aren't also, you know.
Council is jumping on this, I mean, it's a serious issue, so, but it just might be something that this committee considers in future discussions. We're not gonna solve this today, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Maybe it's gonna be resolved by the time this comp plan is put into effect.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that came up at the council meeting that the people in the neighborhood went to was the non-conforming houses that were, you know, exempt from having 20 or more people and things like that in that particular neighborhood. And that was one of the, they were going to, you know, somebody was going to bring it to this to talk about it. So I don't know if that's happening or what, but it was definitely something that was brought up in that meeting.
Yeah, I couldn't go to that meeting, but I
It was
just,
there.
I was pretty aggravated. I mean, it's in my neighborhood, second time this has happened, somebody's going to the
Right.
hospital. I agree with Catherine that I mean, it's not a great idea to engage students, but, or young people, whoever, if they're out there, but at same token, it
Drunk
happens and. Yeah, I mean, you've got to figure out, you know, there's got to be some policies and enforcement in place that try to discourage that, so.
Is that
I'll respond quickly.
I was just gonna
Oh,
ask
sorry.
more about what that non-conforming housing is. Is it illegal housing or is it housing that is allowed to have that many people in it?
So we currently have limitations around how many people can live in a dwelling unit that are unrelated. It is unclear to me if those things are enforceable under Fair Housing Act standards and some other standards. So for what that's worth, anyway, I think to the points that have been made, I'll just respond quickly. I was asked to put together a memo around like land use solutions to this issue, which I don't think it's a firmly land use issue, to be clear, but I did put together some points looking at other communities and how they handle this issue. A lot of it is around, you know, amending our noise ordinance is probably the lowest hanging fruit, empowering and allowing the police to address that noise ordinance. Clarifying that we don't expect the code enforcement officer to be the one coming up here to break up parties and take a noise reading from the property line, which is how our ordinance currently reads. you know, some of these things around parking in the street, blocking sidewalks, blocking roads with too many cars that would cut down on some of the parties. And then some other things around really, less land use specifically, but empowering the police to address some of these issues, as they arise.
It's just a current issue. I don't wanna, go way up here, but it just, again, it might be something that, this committee's asked to weigh in on, so.
Yeah.
Council is addressing it short term, but either way, so just so you're aware.
And I anticipate that council will have another meeting on this, I assume at their next meeting.
Yeah.
I was asked to put together that memo fairly quickly, so.
We'll talk about it on the 12th, I guess.
Yes, so if folks are interested, I would encourage you to attend, and I agree that this will, in the short term, likely be addressed in short order, but.
Is the guy okay?
Apparently, yeah. Unfortunate. All right, thanks to everybody. This crew, you've been really diligent about showing up at all the meetings. I really appreciate that.
That's really good info when you go up your drive. Want to take a minute?
Yeah, there you go.
I see the town still owns the blocks on Godfrey Drive.
Yeah.
Somewhere there needs to be a strip pulled out of there that will allow for a street to come in all that land. Or we will end up in the same mess we did all the town where you got. I mean, towns right now has got an opportunity to get a right of way. Peel it off a little bit off each of the two lots and get, and make a street so that it's that land out in behind there. It's a lot of land in there.
Good idea.
Better.
You got that?
Just, you just had proposed the June 4th for the next meeting. I don't know how many people will sit back, if anybody besides Meredith and I, but that's baccalaureate night for the high school, so. I know that at least a couple of us won't be able to go, that's fine,
And that was
if,
back
you know,
already.
whoever,
Yeah,
but.
back.
but
So there's
just
3
wanted to know.
people that come regularly, might not be here. You wanna throw
No,
out?
Mike.
That's graduation.
Yeah, well, it's the baccalaureate night, it's the pre-graduation
wanna-
awards and stuff,
I'll
yeah.
send you this to my son.
I think you probably should, yeah. So just wanted to mention that. Baccalaureate.
It's off the week to the 11th.
All right, how about the 11th, just quick show, the 11th, perhaps?
I can't do the 11th, but that's okay.
I can't do that.
So Wednesday,
Love is fine.
It works for me at the moment.
I could do the 10th, I can't do the 11th.
Do you wanna,
It's the state
Can we do it?
championship. Come
Oh.
on, everyone.
can we do it Tuesday night?
I-
Catherine, what
I
do
can
you?
do Tuesday.
I'm gone that second week in June, but I could do any other night that first week
I can
and
also
the
do
third week.
Monday the 2nd or Tuesday the 3rd.
Yeah.
If that is easier for folks.
Those both work for me.
So we're looking at June
I'll be here anyway.
Yeah.
What are we thinking?
I'm thinking that it sounds like the 3rd works for folks. So if we could do Tuesday the 3rd, I know. Sorry, you're the one, but we try to.
I'd say he's the winner.
Yeah.
Winner, you're the
I
winner.
don't really have to be here and I can go fishing again.
Bam. All right,
That's what I do.
the 3rd?
The
Throw
3rd,
that out, please email everybody.
yes, perfect.